things have weird delays. Hi, this is
Baseball.
McCray, and Joel T. Sames presents these two knuckleheads, Alan Gallant, joining me to talk about a movie very near and dear to both of us, and based on a play that's very near and dear to both of us. Alan starred in it, and I've directed it. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? By Edward Albee, film directed by the great Mike Nichols in his first foray into directing. I think he was about 12. And not only is it an amazing movie, but the commentary by Nichols is grad
Right.
school level. It's must see, must
Mhm.
listen to, viewing, hearing. And Alan, so you played George in this.
I did
And should
at
we
my
assume
advanced
people
age.
watching should we assume people watching this know the movie or know the plot, or should we kind
Well,
of?
probably a little bit about it. Albee wrote this play in the early 1960s. It debuted on Broadway in 1962. It starred Uta Hagen and Arthur Hill. Um, uh, also, I can't remember.
George Grizzard.
George Grizzard is on the recording, so he was
Okay.
yeah, he was in the early cast, no doubt about it. And also Melinda Dillon, who plays the mom
Yeah.
in The Christmas Story.
Yeah.
Yes, so she was very young, of course. She was probably in her early 20s at that time. Um, the film stars Liz and Dick, Elizabeth Taylor, and Richard Burton, and also George Segal in one of his earlier roles.
Mhm.
A very fine role. He makes it as well. And Sandy Dennis, who by all accounts, was a very atypical actress. She used to do things like getting to burping contests with Elizabeth Taylor on set. She was also she also tended to have odd rhythms. She would experiment with all sorts of odd delivery rhythms and stuff, and would throw people off. But at the same time, it produced a really interesting performance. Uh,
There's a great
great.
book by William Goldman called The Season.
Yeah.
It's about Broadway, and it looks at a season on Broadway. And he has a whole chapter about Sandy Dennis
Mhm.
called "Critics' Darling" because that's what she was.
She was,
And
absolutely.
I think he was a little mystified by this, and thus wrote
He
the
didn't feel
chapter.
the same
Oh, he
way.
didn't.
Thought she was an oddball and inconsistent and not very disciplined and all these other things. But other people found her incredibly fresh, and she brought a sort of that new school, new attitude to every time she performed. Um, and But in this movie, I think she does a fabulous job. I mean, I
She's
think
very good.
her rhythms are really good for Honey. Um, but the play essentially is about, um, well, you can sum it up, and Albee had at various times summed it up as truth and illusion, and
Mhm.
how those two elements war against each other in the hearts and minds of these people. What's the facade, and it's all sort of set to flame by the emotional gasoline of alcohol. In the play, these people are heavy drinkers. The George and Martha are alcoholics, definitely alcoholics. Um, I don't think the younger couple have really lived it long enough to be alcoholics, but they certainly have a problem on this particular night with alcohol.
Now, well, you and I have both known our way around a bottle now and then.
Hmm.
How much alcohol do they? I'm sure you thought about this when you were in it. Do they actually consume,
Well,
just in the part of the play that we see?
yeah, my God. A couple of bottles of you know,
Each.
what's implied, because I mean, Honey takes a bottle off with her to the bathroom, finishes that, and starts peeling the label off. I mean, there's a lot of booze being drunk here. There's probably some artistic license being taken. I know that we
Yes.
in the production that we did, we I was drinking all the time. I mean, there's no way even at and for those of the audience that don't know, I'm a recovering alcoholic. So I've been sober for 32 years, but even at my worst, I could not drink like these people. Uh, just put me. It would have put me in a hospital. And
At the time the story was written, at the time the play was written, I know from watching TV and movies, what drinks looked like,
Mhm.
which were fairly, sort of tallish
Highball,
tumbler glasses,
yeah, tumblers or
uh,
highballs, yeah.
highballs that they would fill up almost all the way with booze, and
Mhm.
I don't think they were doing that just to please the director of photography. I think that
No,
probably
it was.
reflected how people drank back then.
It was just, again, there was some artistic license taken with the frequency of the drinks, I think, especially when you consider they'd been drinking half the night before they even got to place.
That's what I mean. Just in the part we see.
Yeah, yeah. They'd been at the old man's, the president's house, drinking and partying and kibitzing there for several hours. So they were already, when George and Martha walk through the door at the beginning of this play, they're already half in the bag, you
Yeah,
know. So yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, it is, also, for those of you who don't know Edward Albee's personal life. He was something of an alcoholic himself, and ended up getting sober later in life. So alcohol played an important part in his life, as it did in this play. And probably he knew very well the sort of, recrimination type of evenings that this play depicts, a particular one. The thing that's different about this play than probably Albee's life is that this play is about academics. And although Albee certainly could hold his own with any academic, by the time he wrote this play, he was living, I think, in the village, uh, in the East Village, and living a bohemian lifestyle, writing, trying to put together plays. He'd already put together, American Dream and Zoo Story by this time, and was known for that from the late.
Tiny Alice, was
And
that him?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
Okay, yeah.
But I am very familiar with. That's one of the ones that you read scholastically a lot of times. Is that book that has both one acts
They're both American Dream and Zoo Story. Yeah.
in it. And I actually got to, meet Albee, briefly, and listen to him speak at Rollins College down here, in Orlando, when he came down in 2004, I believe it was, to see a production of the Zoo Story, and the American Dream. And it was put together by students. It wasn't terribly professional or anything like that, but fortunately for the cast and crew and everybody else concerned, Albee had been sober by that time, so he did not like tear the hell out of these people.
I
He
would be
was known
terrified of
for
Edward
doing
Albee
it
coming
when
to
he
one of
was
my
drinking.
productions.
Yeah, he was known for doing that. Being dissatisfied with practically everything, um, including this movie, by the way. But
What were his thoughts on the movie?
he wanted James Mason and Betty Davis to be cast, and he thought it'd be funny to have Betty Davis imitate Betty Davis in the first
I
scene.
think that's great. I think that's brilliant.
So, but Albee was gracious. He was wonderful. He talked to the students and everybody else that was there, including myself. I was at UCF at the time, University of Central Florida, getting my master's degree, and he was great. He was extremely generous with his time. He was there for a couple hours, and talked at length about his experiences, with those plays and with other plays. And he, I mean, he was his own worst critic in a lot of ways too. Uh, but what he said about, Virginia Woolf, and by the way, he actually asked the widower of Virginia Woolf permission to use her name in the title, and he came to see the play a couple of years into the run. So, and he liked it. He thought it was okay. Um, but I thought that was rather thoughtful of him, considering his reputation for being irascible and had a hell with it. And sometimes he could be that way too. But this play, this movie, is from the original script, and of course it's edited somewhat. It's only 2 hours and 10 minutes, and the full play is almost 3 hours.
Hmm?
So there is some editing that goes on and some juxtaposition of lines for the sake of conversation continuity. It's not huge. It doesn't hurt the play at all. The one thing that was dropped in 2006, he rewrote some stuff or redacted some stuff for one of the revivals. I forget who was in that revival. It might have been Kathleen Turner. I don't know. She was in one of the revivals anyway. But he completely took out the scene at the end of the second act, which is Walpurgisnacht. There are 3 acts in the play, and the second one is called Walpurgisnacht. And there's a whole scene at the end of that act where George has this whole conversation with Honey, and they just basically took it out.
I love that scene.
They took it out because I think he felt like it was, by that time, because he'd probably seen it so many times, it was redundant because of what happens later, and he was more into, rather than the plotting of what was going to happen, let's let it happen.
Yeah.
And it's all about killing the imaginary child. It's a conversation about,
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and so it's sort of a plotting that's going on instead of the actual shock of having him say, "I'm sorry, dear, but I have to tell you this," and just have.
Yeah, I mean, one of the many things I like about that scene is that not the way it's done in the movie. I mean, the way it's done in the movie is fine, but depending on how it's performed, Honey potentially has a lot more participation and agency in springing this on Martha, because it's her revenge on Martha also.
Sure.
And I love that. I really cherish that. That gives her character suddenly this whole other dimension,
Right.
And that I think she's capable of.
Yeah, and for our audience, George and Honey are getting together because their prospective spouses have gotten together upstairs
Sexually. But Honey and George are not. They're just colleagues.
They're just talking about it. And
yeah, and so for me, what that does is it brings in a dimension of suspense. That's seeing the ticking bomb under the desk, as Hitchcock would say.
Right. I think there's an argument to be made for that. Absolutely. I just think that probably Albee pulled it out because he thought of the action rather than the planning of it. But I agree with you. I think it can be worked that way very easily and very effectively, and was for years. I mean, it wasn't really taken out of every single production until 2006. So, and actually, I think it probably, people still probably use the older script, wink, nudge, nudge. But
new script, what's that?
Yeah, right. But
I've worked with both of the scripts, and I much prefer the older script.
The older script talks right from the beginning about, it really sets up the whole thing about the the kid, the blah 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 blah, and they talk about it in the first scene when they come in the door and they're having one of the things about this movie that I found, because of probably the way that we did it and rehearsed it, was that first scene is very slow to build, very slow energetically. It's not really high energy, but it's film, so I understand that. It still has that claustrophobia, even though it plays out, the whole film plays out in a much larger environment than what you get in the play. You just get
they're going in the bedroom, they're going in the bathroom, everywhere.
Outside, they go to the
kitchen,
all the bar, all the stuff. So, and I understand that cinematically, that's interesting. And that's where some of the dialogue, of course, gets kind of switched around, and a couple things get added in.
Now, wasn't there a thing about someone trying to pressure Nichols into doing this in color?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that would have been Warner Brothers executives. Yes, at the time, and of course, he'd already set it up for black and white. And they tried to BS him into doing it by saying, "Oh, just shoot it in color. We can always turn it into black and white." And
it's not the same thing. It's
not. And you're not going to get the same. You're not going to get the same shadowing or the same. The grain is going to be different when you convert it to black and white. Stock, everything's going to be messed up, and of course his crew agreed, and he just went to bat. At the first film, he didn't know what was going to happen, but they gave in because he had. I think he may have implied that he could get his big time cast to walk if they didn't do what he told them to do. So that would not have been good.
I could see Burton and Taylor getting behind that.
Yeah, yeah. I think there may have been some implication in the meetings that
Well, and there was such a prestige to black and white filmmaking at that time,
it
and
was.
Burton and Taylor had been so stuck in the ghetto of color,
They
you
had
know.
some, like with the Taming of the Shrew and all the stuff that they ended up even doing around the same time. She ended up doing Cleopatra the year later, or
Mhm.
no, around the same time, I guess.
Yeah.
It came out a year later. And yeah, all this lurid sort of Technicolor stuff that they were doing. Yeah.
So
And,
it was I think, a feather in the cap to be able to do this tight black and white, you
hmm
know, capital D,
hmm
capital R, capital AMA, color or
yeah,
black and white movie.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was. And yeah, and it was towards the end of that golden era where people still had the choice, directors and studios still had the choice. What will we do with this movie? Shall we do it in
Yeah.
black and white or color? Um, I
I miss those days, which I never experienced.
Yeah, Good Night and Good Luck was the last movie I think I saw that was modern, that was in black and white. The Artist is another one, but
Yeah.
that's a silent film. They made it. They would have done it in some
Hmm.
either sepia or black and white anyway. But Good Night and Good Luck, which is now making its way apparently to the stage.
Good.
Yes, and Clooney's going to play um, uh,
Tomorrow.
Murrow. Yeah,
That's great.
yeah, yeah. Because
That's great.
Clooney was in it, but he mostly directed it and wrote it, I think. But he was in it as one of the other guys at CBS. He wasn't.
What one of the things that occasionally the English do with plays that are hundreds of years old is they'll do cycles of them, and where you can see related plays kind of produced in concert. And gosh, I would love to see the play of Good Night and Good Luck alongside Network,
Yeah,
Bryan Cranston Network. Yeah,
yeah.
really something.
That'd be cool. Same day or one day after the next. Or
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I like that subject matter anyway. I like journalistic history, particularly in this day and age where you can sort of so contrast it against what's happening right now.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
To be reminded.
I so this is getting into sort of philosophical waters here, but how is it that this film is so dramatically successful with an ending that can be so difficult to understand? That so many people can leave this thing, and sometimes me, not
Yeah,
really knowing what the hell just happened. I
right.
directed it, not knowing what the hell just happened, but God, I love it.
I think, and the philosophy that we had when we rehearsed it and did it on stage, in an incredibly intimate setting, um, was that there better be some kind of attachment, even love, between these two people, George and Martha in particular,
Oh yeah,
and
oh yeah,
also Nick and Honey as well. There has to be something there beyond the pain and suffering of the illusion being broken, and the resentment and all that other stuff that's happening. Because if you realize that the whole thing is set up as a series of games, they're psychological games they're playing. Particularly George and Martha, which they already have a pre-done script of these different games, which culminates in like uh, get the guests and bringing up a baby. And it's
yeah,
just like, oh my God, now everything is being ripped apart.
yeah.
And in some ways, it's almost like, uh, going through a painful operation to remove a cancer uh,
Mm.
for these people on a psychological level. And the end of the play, it's like, we're done with this illusion. We have to be if we're going to go on. And I think we can. I think we can go on, Martha. I think we can go on, George. And I know these kids that left here are just going to say these people are crazy, and they're going to figure out a way to go on. Now that they've sort of been exposed for the disappointments that they have in each other. Either they go on together or separately, but they go
Mm.
on, and So for me, that was it. And we also started the play a little bit more upbeat than they do in the film. The film
Hmm.
is just like this percolating resentment and oh god, throughout that whole first scene, and then things start to pick up a little bit, and they laugh at each other and so on. I kind of played the energy, which was done in the original production, as I found out later when I listened to the recording and so on, which is out there. Columbia Masterworks made a recording of it, a full 4 LP set. It has the
Wow.
entire play, and you can still pick it up for 40 or $50 if you can find it on eBay every once in a while. But so it really goes. I mean, Hagen is like, "Come along with me," and she's just going, 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 and apparently she wasn't really impressed with Arthur Hill too much. By the way, for those of you that might know older television, Arthur Hill had a television series in the 70s, I believe. Owen Marshall. It was called Owen Marshall.
Oh yeah.
And Uta Hagen, of course, great
Yeah,
fame.
the ice cream. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
Um,
that's right. Uta Hagen does. Um, but yeah, great fame as a not only as an actress but also as a great teacher as well for many many years. But
she is someone who, when they're tired of arguing with me, inevitably quotes to disgust me and make me go away. It's like, oh
yeah,
God, we're at the Hagen quoting phase. I'm out of here. I'm done.
yeah, I don't spout too many acting teachers, although Hagen is certainly
If you're gonna spout one,
yeah,
she's a good one.
might as well be that, um, either that or there are a couple that are reasonably decent. The actor studio I tend to stay away from. I don't like the guy.
Yeah, yeah. No, I have no need for Lee, but I like a good Sandy Meisner quote.
Yeah,
I like
yeah,
him. And
yeah,
Stella Adler, she's great. I
yeah.
like her.
Well, Adler's she's got some brilliant ideas because well, she's got several generations of acting in her family too. By the time she was, came along, but yeah, the first scene we played it like coming in the door, a little bit happy,
Hmm.
a little bit funny, and it's like yeah, they were a little irritated with each other, but it's like part of the game, so whatever.
Yeah.
I don't remember the movie, Martha. That kind of instead of I really don't remember the movie, Martha. Where he's boiling over. I understand the choices, but I think by the up a little bit more up at the beginning before you experience the first crash, and you get the relationship has a positive quality to it down
You've got to.
inside there
You've got to. It's essential, and it's one of the places the movie maybe fails a little bit
at the beginning.
in not establishing that, because just like you never show your top, you never show your bottom,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of, it's like, oh, okay, it's
Kind of
this.
go to the bottom
Now,
there.
thank God, Burton and Taylor are so great, they can
They are,
overcome that.
and they have an opportunity, like she crawls into bed with him and does some of that kind of stuff. So there's some intimacy there as the scene
Oh,
progresses.
I mean, I found places for them to make out. I
Yeah.
found places for them to kind of wrestle a little bit,
Mhm.
and there was a great moment in rehearsal because we had all this old furniture from thrift stores, and there was a big loungy chair that looked like it was more stable than it was,
And it
and my
collapsed.
guy playing George like plopped down in it, and it just rolled over, and suddenly he was just sitting with his back on the floor, and what did he do? He crossed his legs. He didn't get out of it. He crossed his legs and picked
And
up a
kept going.
newspaper and started as if his orientation were the same. And it was so funny in rehearsal, we had to keep it.
Oh God.
And it was a little burlesque, but when you think about the energy the show requires to sustain itself,
Oh my
and you
God.
think about the idea, one of the things I really enjoy doing as a director is seducing the audience into thinking they're watching one kind of play, and then slowly it's revealed, no, it's actually this. And so this is under the surface of all sorts of things all the
Hmm.
time, we just don't
Yeah.
recognize it.
Right. Right. And having some initial lightheartedness and a bit of humor in that first scene helps do that. I think for the later.
Well, and it, Michael Shirtliff has this great thing in his book on auditioning. What are you fighting for?
Mm-hmm.
And when you see a relationship where the two people are taking some pleasure in it, in the midst of everything else, then you see what they're fighting for.
Right. That there's something at the core of it that's worth
Yeah,
continuing.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the movie. It's this 11th hour bit with the Snapdragons where
Yeah.
suddenly George and Martha are teaming up
Right.
on Nick,
Right.
and that's the first glimpse of that you really get.
Right.
And it's wonderful to see these glimpses much earlier. And for me, the longest, fastest to occur, most passionate kiss in the play is right after Total War. Total
Yes.
pow, and they're just making out
Yeah.
until Nick and Honey interrupt them, and then they
Right.
split up like they don't want to be caught doing that
That's
because it
right.
would give too much away.
Right.
That is a fun play. I mean,
It is.
for a play about such incredible destruction,
It is.
it's a delight.
It is. It's
And
it should have won the Pulitzer, but unfortunately they were still too puritanical on the committee. Yeah, they were still too puritanical on the committee to give it to him because they're talking about sex. They say the F word because in the play they do. And oh my God, we cannot give
the
this.
Deus Irae.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
He won it later, but he won it anyway, but just not for that.
He, the Nichols in his commentary says there should be a laugh every 20 seconds. I think. I think he means on average.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do.
Because, I mean, you're not going to have that in the exorcism
from a
scene.
guy who was in a comic act with Elaine May.
I mean, he knew his way around
At that, yeah,
he knew his way around this stuff.
he did, absolutely did, and then he did The Odd Couple. I mean, he directed the stage before he.
That's a weird movie. So weird. I mean, it's a weird play. Also,
It
I directed the
is a
play,
weird play, but
it's a tough show to do.
Yeah, and he turned it into something that was really, popular, and he got his laugh almost every 20 seconds, out of that. But yeah, it's still incredible to me that this is his first.
It took me 3 weeks to realize that FU stood for Felix Unger.
Yeah,
That's the funniest line on the play.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's good. Yeah, a lot of it's situational, which is why it turned into such a great situation comedy later on television. But the sisters and their attitudes and stuff like that, more than the lines themselves. Neil Simon did his comedic homework, especially earlier in his career, up through the middle part of his career. No, even the latter part, he did a couple of good shots, but he understood what Noel Coward understood. Sometimes you don't have to have a gag line. You have to have a response, an action and a response that works out. Like if you've probably read Hay Fever, it's not a very funny play to read. You put it on the stage and you literally can piss your pants watching if it's done right. So,
I think about that I wanted to. Because it became such a thing about gender when Simon wrote the female version of The Odd Couple.
Sure.
And we've come so far since then. I've honestly been curious about how much change you would have to do to adapt the female version for men.
Yeah.
These are men who play Trivial Pursuit. We see that all the time. That's sort of geek culture.
Yes, and not only that, but also the culture has definitely changed a lot even since the female version came out. So if you were pretending that the female version was the only version, what would you? Yeah, it would be a different play. It would totally be a different.
I had a really interesting experiment at the very least for a reading.
Yeah. Apparently, at one point, speaking of gender, Richard Burton wanted to get together an all-male cast and do Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Well, yeah, but it didn't. Albee just kept putting the kibosh on that sort of
thing.
Yes,
he didn't
again and again and again.
He kept his estate still puts the kibosh on certain permutations. For one thing, I got into an argument with somebody about this once a number of years ago. They wanted to make Nick African American, some production wanted to do that. Well, he's kind of this blonde, blue-eyed, and he's described that.
Yeah, that's the
He's
whole
described
that's
as
the
a
whole
nut
dynamic about that.
you know? Yeah, because in the play, which they cut one of the monologues that George has in the play, he's talking about, he goes into great detail about eugenics with this
Yes.
biologist, and he's just putting it to him the whole time. And you can't do that with an African American guy. You just can't do that. You'd have to completely cut that monologue out.
Now, okay, so here's a question, especially considering that could you have a Black George?
I think uh, I think he allowed an all black cast.
Okay.
I think he did, and allowed a few changes for that. But I think that was okay. But he did not want to have that kind of
Well, there are enough
stand-up.
politics going on in this that adding racial politics into it is like, guys, we got tons of things flying around in this show. I don't
Right,
know if we have the mental
right.
capacity to add that also
Yeah,
and retain our sanity.
yeah. Well, Albee was extreme stickler for author's intent anyway, and he made people stop doing things.
Oh, I know.
His estate has still done that. And I got in an argument with somebody who said, well, you should be able to do this kind of, alternative casting. And I said, the author explicitly said no.
Yeah.
Forbid it. And he did not forbid it because he was a Nazi. He forbid it because he thought it was inappropriate for the particular piece. And I could see that point. And in other cases, I can see alternative casting is very easy to do in other plays. This
brings us to a really weird philosophical place in play building that you and I had never talked about. What do you do? I mean, legally, I know what you do, but
yeah.
which is you don't. But ethically and spiritually, what do you do when you have a play that has a lot of really good stuff in it, but it's not all good?
All right.
And there are ways that potentially it can be framed. Not a Pepsi. Sad. There are ways it can be framed to be even better. That if we add this or reduce that, and so on, it was just what people have been doing with Shakespeare for years.
Right.
Uh,
Director as
what,
auteur. Yeah.
yeah. Where does that fall in the sphere of ethics that we're talking about?
It falls. Legally, it falls outside.
Well, yeah. I mean, we know this.
Inside the purview of ethics, it may fall fine if an author, I think if an author or an author's estate gives it permission, if it is no longer copyrighted, you can do things like that. That's not a problem. It's absolutely not a problem. But I was, this is just me, I was just brought up with author's intent as being pretty sacrosanct in most cases. Now, I do understand why Shaw has to be sometimes clipped and why Shakespeare has to be altered in certain, this scene has to maybe not go there or whatever sometimes because of the length of some of these plays. It's just.
Well, not only that, I mean, sometimes there are other things that are possible. Like look at Arthur Miller and Enemy of the People.
Yes. Yep.
I that was in graduate school. That was one of my great battles.
Yeah.
That I fought internally. And my training was kind of English, so there was a bit more. The director was a bit more at the center rather than the author.
Right.
So there was a lot less, and especially if the play was kind of half bad, half good, but half bad. Just like
how do we fix that? Well, that's also a good exercise, especially when you're learning the craft. How do you fix things if you're allowed to fix them? And you need to be able to know how to do that. You need to have that, that creative ability. So I get that. I totally get that. And I think it's entirely appropriate in some cases. In other cases, it's kind of, you have to stay away from it. That's all.
I'm really glad the statute of limitations exists. Some of the things I did, I'll just say that.
Okay.
I'll just say that. I feel like I should send the authors a bill.
I will tell you that there was a rash down here in Florida at one time of directors messing around with stuff that was pretty ironclad, and they got their licensing pulled. Yeah, somebody that disagreed with them, found out about it or whatever, or an
Excellent.
actor thought it was a terrible thing to do, or something happened, and they got outed. And it's pretty, if it's explicitly stated in the
There's
license,
no
you don't
ambiguity.
do that, then you don't do that. You just can't.
The contracts I have found have gotten even more ironclad lately.
Some of yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, some of them are musicals in particular.
yeah.
They've got so much copywriting going on in a musical. It's like
I,
layered three layers deep because of you've got the book and you've got the and you've got the
there
music.
was a show I did, a very popular show. I mean, it wasn't necessarily popular the way I did it, but it was a very popular, well-known show,
Yes.
and from a very, very well-known company. We had to give photographs of our fire marshal certificate.
Oh yeah.
We had to give photocopies of like our last 8 posters.
Wow.
I,
That's a little weird. I can understand the fire marshal if there's pyro in the show.
well, it
I
was
can
Greece.
understand that.
The show was Greece,
Yeah.
and for Greece,
Yeah.
I
Interesting.
I had to jump through more hoops
Yeah.
with. Maybe I would get in trouble if I said the representative's name, but I'll tell you later.
Okay.
It was authorially ironic.
Considering how problematic Greece is nowadays.
Is it?
Yes. Oh, it's
How?
misogyny, really bad.
Okay, so we talk about
But
presentism.
this is an ethical question of presentism. That's right. That's
Yeah,
exactly
I mean,
what it is.
when we did it, we very much looked at, man, aren't we glad it's not like that now?
Sure, sure.
That
And to
was
look at it as a timepiece.
that's what we did.
Yeah,
And that's what it was for the people who made it.
that's
And for
correct.
the straight play it was based on, which was all very rough and
Yeah,
ready and kind of, Norman Learish in a
yeah,
way.
yeah.
Uh Pre-Norman Lear.
And it was like a 50s punkster version of Guys and Dolls in terms of the thickness of the culture of that time.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's odd because the most painfully politically correct performers I had didn't really complain about the context. I think they
Right.
knew
Yeah.
this is,
This is
I mean,
what. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, if you're doing roots,
Yeah.
if you're doing, you don't say, hey, wait, I don't know, we should do something with the slave aspect. Well, that's the era. That's what it's about. How do we?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like Showboat. That people want to tread lightly around certain aspects of that too. But you
But then you lose the
and
slice
you
of American
lose the
history.
reasoning. That's right. You lose the reasoning behind it. Why is she trying to pass? That's why. She's
I mean, it's just a very poignant story
yes.
and illustration and a big slice of relief for the fact that we live when we live
Hmm.
now.
Yeah.
Maybe I had more relief a few years ago,
Yeah.
but
Maybe. Yes. Yes. I was thinking the same thing. The
yeah,
relief waning, unfortunately, as we get older, and the generation that's come after us has got a lot of stuff to deal with on that.
it does. I think any conversation. This is fantastic. I mean, it's one of the great American plays.
Yes.
Certainly in the second half of the 20th century, maybe one of the 4 or 5
Hmm.
great American plays. They kind of began to taper after a while.
Right.
Um, I, I think any conversation about this never ends. It just stops. Until you pick it back up again.
Right. Yeah. No. No. It's great
Um,
because there's so many facets to it, and things pop up um, depending on what your viewpoint is. Whether you're even if you're looking at it from the viewpoint of 1961 or two when it came out, um, you can see a lot of things that weren't really being discussed a whole lot.
mhm.
Even you can find it in literature. Some of this stuff you're going to have to go deeper into, personal biographies and people like Anais Nin and stuff like that in terms of some of the sort of deep relational and sexual things that are going on in this play.
I have an interesting sort of, because I am moving towards the wrapping up of the talk phase of
Uh-huh.
this, but I have an interesting kind of anecdote, maybe springboard to a related discussion, and it's this: I horrified two venerable actresses who you and I know pretty well when they asked me what shows I did at my high school, and I mentioned this as one of them.
Yes.
You would have thought I wrapped a Bible in a flag and then burned it.
Yeah.
I mean, they were like concerned for my immortal soul.
Yeah.
One of them, I got, and I mean, they were beautiful. They were just, I mean, it was genuine concern.
Yes.
It wasn't. There was no condescension. There was no
Right.
assholery. It was
Right.
great. One of them said, "Have you heard of Charlie's Aunt?" It's
Oh
like
my.
the helpful suggestion. I was veering. I was going to do Angels in America next or Jerker or something like
Yeah.
that. And and yeah, he's drunk at the wheel, and that was a really interesting moment because the the kids who I had, they're very advanced and they loved it. They really, really, really dug it.
Mhm.
And did they understand everything in it? I don't know. I understand everything in it. I've never
Right.
been married.
Right.
I mean, I've had relationships. I've never been married. But God knows, many of these kids. I'm not saying the kids who were in my production. Many of these kids have parents who,
Right.
and
Sure.
so they're used to that element in the house.
Sure.
Uh, and you don't stop a high school from putting on Hamlet because no one's father has been murdered by their uncle and a ghost appeared, and the uncle's married the mom, and I mean, there's just a degree of, let's talk about the human experience that we're not experiencing,
Right.
that seems to be part and parcel of theater.
I think it
um
especially is important for theater kids to get that experience, because they're not going to get it almost anywhere else.
they didn't dig the play because of the poo poo caca
Right.
aspect of the language or something, which I think would probably be the first. Oh, they just liked it because they got to do. Well, it's like, what, they get to do that in a lot of plays.
They get
This
to do
It's not
that
1962.
outside the stage door, just talking to each other.
Yeah, so that's not the element. It's the crackle of the interaction.
Yeah.
It's the stakes. It's seeing, in some ways, how infantile adults can be,
Sure.
and then pull themselves back from the brink. So I guess that was, I don't know if that was a question so much as just my opportunity to
Right.
ramble about that. But it was a really, I think their reaction was as shocking to me as my statement that I had done the show was shocking to them.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that may have just been generational, that their memory of it was when it was new and it was like a
Sure.
grenade going off.
Sure. And it was. It was definitely like a grenade going off. Yeah. You're talking about a couple of actresses who were probably in their 20s or around 20
I would
years
say that,
old
yes,
when
yes,
this play came out. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So they were adults. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, or
They went running to
late teen,
Charlie's Aunt.
late teens, mid to
Yeah.
late teens. Yeah,
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. And
yeah.
running to Charlie's Aunt after
And
that.
Charlie's Aunt's a great play. It's
It is a
it's
good
a
play,
fine
but
show. We can do both.
yes, absolutely.
We can do both.
That and an
But
evening.
that was the greatest testament for me historically to the power and significance of the play.
Oh yeah.
Was the incredibly visceral reaction they had. And I felt bad. I go, oh God, I ruined dinner. Mm. I really did. I was like, oh shit. There we go.
Yeah.
But it
I
was it was
yeah.
endearing and it was very just revealing
Yeah.
about the play.
Yeah. Absolutely. It is it's a pretty timeless piece of work too. I mean it stands up nicely. I like it.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I read this in high school in my high school English class. I guess I was maybe a sophomore or a junior,
Mhm.
and so I was about 17 or so, and we loved it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the cock-a-doodle effect. I mean, that's
No,
not
it's not.
what it is at all.
It's no, it's the it is it's all a human element. It's all this wonderful layering and stuff that's going on in it.
People ask me what plays do I like or what movies do I like, and I say, well, it's got to have one of two elements, hopefully both. It's interesting people doing ordinary things, or it's ordinary people doing really interesting things, or at best, interesting people doing interesting things. And
Uh-huh.
I would say this falls into that third category.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's highly, you don't see intelligent characters goofing off
Yeah.
like this.
Right. It's true. It's true. And the fact is that there's, and the dichotomy between their intelligence, these are all incredibly intelligent people,
Hmm.
and their emotional state, which is not the same at all.
Yes.
So that's really always an interesting conflict.
I don't know if we will, but because we're kind of juggling while Jewel is on sabbatical.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm not going to officially suggest this, but we could easily come back and just talk about Nick and Honey
It's
next
true.
time. Or yeah, I mean, there's
It's
just
true.
so much to get into,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the weird obscurity that YouTube loves. Well, let's I guess let's pause this for tonight and maybe talk about what we want to do tomorrow,
Okay.
or the next day.
Yep.
And I'm Patrick McCray,
And I'm Alan Gallant.
and good evening. Stop.